Story 1. Probably when I went to the emergency room with chest pain. I was not yet having a heart attack. The heart attack started when I was in an exam room with an emergency room doctor. They rushed me to the stent laboratory where they opened a blocked artery. The heart attack lasted about 15 minutes, enough to cause some muscle damage but little enough that I am still here. Story 2. My fiancé came home in a drug and alcohol-fueled rage. One of us is here to tell the story, and one of us is not. Story 3. Last September 11th, I was sitting in the emergency room parking lot of the local hospital, debating whether or not I was sick enough to go in. I couldn't breathe very well, so after about an hour I did. The person who was admitting patients took one look at me and got me a room. I didn't leave for 4 days. My oxygen level was between 60 and 65%. I was developing pneumonia, and my organs were starting to shut down. It turned out that I had 4 infections, 2 viral and 2 bacterial. They were asking me about end-of-life care, whether I wanted home oxygen, and so on. Even with all of the medication, I was having trouble keeping my oxygen level over 90% so they could send me home. I asked them to take the oxygen off for the night, and by morning I was up to 93% or higher. I walked out of the hospital that day under my own power. I have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and my infections were worsened by some fires that were burning nearby. My coworker came to work with a cold that pushed me over the edge and almost killed me. I had to quit my job eventually and go into a different line of work. Story 4. While mountain climbing, I lost my footing and began sliding down an icy slope, heading straight off a cliff. For a moment, I was certain I was going to die until my foot miraculously jammed into a crevice, stopping my fall just in time. I was stuck, and it took a good half hour to carefully pull myself back to solid ground, knowing that one wrong move could send me over the edge. I remember thinking my odds were maybe going to die today. What surprises me most is that I don't recall feeling fear. Startled at first, sure, but not afraid of dying. Instead, I felt a strange, peaceful calm, knowing I had lived a decent life. In a way, I even felt lucky because if that was going to be the end, at least it came with a beautiful view. Story 5. A construction accident in Jamaica almost impaled me. Multiple pieces of reinforcing bars slid off a building and pierced the car right next to the sidewalk. They came so close to my face that I felt the wind from them. I now have phobias of construction sites without pedestrian protections. Story 6. I was almost pulled into a brown station wagon by 2 men when I was 11 years old. If it had not been for the postman walking around the corner at that moment, I would have been gone. Story 7. When I was 16 during class, I thought I was having a heart attack. I had all the symptoms, especially shortness of breath. I was taken by ambulance to find out my left lung had collapsed. They said it was 99% collapsed. They were able to save it, but I was very lucky. They called it a spontaneous pneumothorax, meaning my chest cavity had filled with air, collapsing my lung. Nothing I did caused it. It just happened. Story 8. I fell asleep while driving and nearly went off a bridge before my dad jerked the wheel away and slapped me awake so I could pull over. Story 9. I nearly got run over 3 times. Once by a van, a motorcycle, and then a bus. Story 10. Crossed the street without looking while drunk, and a car hit the brakes very hard. Passed out in my bathroom while drunk and hit my head on the sink. I woke up with a cut on my forehead. While swimming in the ocean, I got very far out and the current was very strong. I have never swam so hard to get back to shore. Adrenaline is a powerful thing. I do not think I would have beaten the current without an adrenaline rush. Story 11. Almost getting hit by a huge ship. We were on a small boat, and the propeller was stuck with some debris. Story 12. I was working in security and entered a vacant space that was under construction. The lights were off while my supervisor and I were navigating around to find the switch to turn them on. My foot hit a large live wire coming out of the floor, causing the entire vacant space to light up with a purple flash. Thank God for the boots I was wearing. Story 13. Out of nowhere, I had a generalized tonic-clonic seizure one day. I woke up from a coma 6 days later to find out that my heart had stopped 3 times and that I had a cancerous brain tumor. Story 14. Car accident. ejected through the back window and knocked out as a result. When I regained consciousness, the car that hit us was resting literally inches from crushing my head as I lay on the back of the car. People who stopped to help thought I was dead. One lady screamed when I moved. I just thanked God that it was not my time to go. Story 15. My sister threw a metal swing at me when I was younger. I was rushed to the hospital and was told it was only a couple of centimeters away from hitting my temple. If it had hit my temple, I definitely would have died. Story 16. Almost got into a midair plane crash. For context, I fly out of a small untowered airport with a larger towered airport about 6 miles south. I took off in a Cessna on the south-facing runway and, after climbing a bit, made a left turn to stay in the traffic pattern. Suddenly, I received an alert that said, "Traffic 12 o'clock, same altitude," and a Cirrus came barreling at us at full speed, 120 knots, as shown on FlightAware. Below our traffic pattern altitude and directly over the airport, inbound to the larger airport. Had I not been flying a plane equipped with the traffic alert system, I would have been dead. It was so close I could see the other pilot and his gray headset. I still have recurring nightmares about it. Story 17. I was filming a piece about men who hand paint large billboards and advertisements on the sides of buildings in New York City. We were on a rooftop about 20 stories up, and they were on scaffolding with a pulley painting the adjacent building, which was taller but directly touched the building I was on. I wasn't thinking and was pointing my camera up at them as I walked backward. For some reason, I stopped just as I was about to step off the edge of the rooftop. I narrowly escaped death by half a step. Story 18. Remember those solar covers on pools that look like bubble wrap? We had one. It was a big pool. My brothers would swim under that cover from one end of the pool to the other. I thought I could do it too. I was alone. About halfway, I tried to come up for air but could not lift the cover. After some panic, I started swimming again and made it. First grade me never tried that again. Story 19. When I was a newborn baby, someone gave me a cold sore. My underdeveloped immune system caused it to inflame my brain and lungs, nearly killing me. I was in the hospital for a month, and it left me with a brain scar. Do not kiss babies. Story 20. Once, as a child, I was on a gravitron-style ride, the kind that spins quickly, pressing you against the wall with centrifugal force. The ride had a gap in the outer wall that aligned with the exit when it stopped. I was impatient to get off, so I jumped through the gap while the machine was still spinning. Very unwise. It was not the first time I nearly got myself injured at that fairground. Story 21. I dodged a wheel coming at me on the highway. I was traveling about 55 miles per hour, and the tire was going at least that fast, head-on. Story 22. An ovarian cyst burst, causing a severe infection that was pressing on my liver. The emergency room doctor said I would have died if I had not gone to the hospital. Story 23. Ill-advised 6-car pass on a rural road while riding my motorcycle. I was doing about 110 kilometers per hour as I drew even with the last car I was passing, and a big deer leapt across in front of me. I could have touched it if I had reached forward. Neither I nor the lead car hit it. I momentarily let off the throttle out of shock, but then had to accelerate again because I had an 18-wheeler coming at me in the oncoming lane. That was probably the closest I have come, that I know of, to actively dying. Story 24. Motorbike accident. Traveling at 80 miles per hour, my back wheel blew out. I hit a central reservation, and my helmet somehow came off. My bike landed on top of me and dragged me until it came to a stop. My leathers were essentially glued to me due to the friction from the drag. I woke in the hospital a week later and was told I was incredibly lucky to be alive. My skin had been shredded off my legs and arms. I had a fractured skull, 4 broken ribs, and both lungs had collapsed. I broke my collarbone and left leg, shattered both wrists, broke 4 fingers, and had a broken ankle. Recovery took about 6 months. Story 25. 4 seizures, 1 face down in a pool. Thankfully, people dragged me out. Story 26. I was a kid in the 1980s when our school changed the medication policy so that everything was locked with the nurse. I had an asthma attack, but no one could find the nurse or the keys. I passed out and woke up intubated in the emergency room, apparently almost died. I saved a younger friend from drowning. He was in full panic when I got to him. He almost pulled me under by thrusting himself upwards unexpectedly. I came very close to taking water in. A riptide off Maui a couple of years later sent a friend and me out to sea quickly. We were inexperienced kids who did not know ocean safety basics, such as swimming parallel to shore if caught in a riptide. We caught the attention of the entire beach but were exhausted by the time we understood to swim parallel. Floating on our backs only carried us further out. By the time we reached the shore, our legs felt like jelly and did not work. So we almost drowned near the shore after struggling to keep our heads above the waves. We were saved by a couple of local men who carried us in their arms to the beach, with dozens of people surrounding us. Finally, there was a mass shooting at a mall. The only reason my wife and I were not directly in front of the shooter when he opened fire was that my wife turned us around to go back into the Suncoast for some friends' DVDs. She remembered it would be a good gift for a friend. Shots fired repeatedly, with gunshots and screams echoing up and down the hallways. We were locked inside the Suncoast for a while, with Christmas music playing in the background as people were shot and screaming. Story 27. Driving home, I hit a deer and overcorrected. I was 19 at the time and flipped the car. The car was upside down and sliding. I knew telephone poles were everywhere. I was like, please stop, please stop. The car stopped in a ditch and I crawled out the broken back window. It was crazy, as everything went super slow. Time had literally slowed down completely in my brain. A nurse drove by, and besides a stiff back, I was fine. She told me if I had not been wearing a seatbelt, I would have been thrown out. Wear your seatbelt. Story 28. When I had total respiratory failure from a bacterial infection in my lungs, I was on life support for a month. My brain has never been the same. Story 29. A bus driver drove onto train tracks but could not drive off because the other side was blocked. Everyone evacuated just in time. Story 30. Anaphylaxis during a computed tomography scan to check for blood clots in my lungs. You usually get a warm feeling from the contrast used sometimes with computed tomography scans. I had had one before and had no issue. The second time I felt warm and then things started getting really hot. Then my whole body was burning. My nose immediately became clogged. My eyes started swelling. My lips started swelling. My tongue started swelling. They ripped the intravenous line that provided the contrast from my arm. I had another intravenous line in my other arm. They started rushing me back to the emergency room and asked my mother to leave. That is the last thing I remember. Story 31. Lost alone in the bush as an Australian at 15 years old. Thank God for kind strangers. Story 32. I almost fell down a cliff when I was a child playing tug of war with my friends. Yes, we were foolish. Story 33. My car accident 6 years ago was not horrible or graphic. I was driving home, going through an intersection with a green light. The cars waiting to turn had a blinking yellow arrow. The first vehicle was large and they went through. I watched them closely because I could have hit them. Immediately after, I learned the reason for their action. The smaller car behind them kept honking to make them go because they didn't want to wait. That smaller car turned with the large vehicle, thinking they could make it. I was driving a good speed for that road, but my brain could not process it quickly enough to apply the brakes. I collided with full force into the right rear passenger side of that car. In one seamless move, I was thrust into my dashboard, with my head and neck jerked to the right from the airbag deploying, then felt like I was on a carnival ride as my car spun from the impact. I came to a quick stop, dirt and dust settling. I looked through the cracked windshield and saw cars stopping all around me. My car was pointed toward oncoming traffic. Despite rude comments from some drivers slowly passing by, I was grateful for those who rushed to help. I was in shock because it happened so quickly, felt like a bomb detonated in my face. I sustained minor injuries that have long since healed, but that day felt like a close call with death. If my airbag had not deployed, I would not be telling this story. If I had hit a bit harder or in a different spot, the accident could have been worse. On a lighter note, a day or so before the accident, My oldest child asked me to buy some Oreos at the gas station one morning. I laughed and said, "Not for breakfast, I'm sorry." A few days later, I was at the same gas station, saw those Oreos and grabbed 2 packages for them. Life is too short. Have those Oreos for breakfast. Story 34. When I was young, I reached for my toy that had dropped at the deep end of the pool. I didn't know how to swim then. I fell in and blacked out. I don't remember anything leading up to my drowning. I remember waking up in the most peaceful state. No, thoughts were going through my head, and the water was the bluest I had ever seen. Then once I was pulled up, reality hit, and my lungs were on fire. I was nonstop coughing and gasping for air. I wish I could tell the person who saved me, "Thank you." Again. Story 35. The first time I was riding a bike on a one-lane street. A car was heading toward me and I froze. Being the 7-year-old I was, I snapped out of it at the last second and avoided a collision. When my parents asked why I froze, I said my steering wheel wasn't working. An obvious lie. They checked it and found out that it was, in fact, faulty. If you turned it too fast, the steering wheel would turn, but the tire wouldn't. I probably saved myself from a future accident by almost getting into one. A few months after they fixed it, it started to become faulty again. I would have seriously been hit by a car on my way home from school if the driver on the same street hadn't slammed on his brakes. I wasn't riding in the middle of the road. I was off to the side. Because the steering wheel was faulty, I lost my balance. While trying to regain it, I lost balance even more, causing the steering wheel to do a 180 as I fell into the middle of the road. Story 36. I was backpacking in Denali National Park. There is only one road in and out of the park, and to get in, you have to hop on a school bus that comes by every hour. I was waiting for the bus when a brown bear kept zigzagging closer and closer until it was about 40 yards away. Finally, the bus arrived, and I ran down the hill and jumped on. There were many foreign tourists from all over the world excitedly asking if I had seen the bear. Yes, I saw the bear. They also asked why the bus was late. Story 37. Narrowly escaped being kidnapped at 14. I realized that I probably would have been killed. Story 38. When I realized my taxi driver was drunk while driving on cliffside roads outside Prague, he handed me a half-drank bottle of some local alcohol. I thought, "I'm not dying sober," and took a large gulp of it. It was harsh. I have no idea how we got into town safely. Story 39. In the early 1990s, in Virginia Beach at a bar, a friend introduced me to a man. We flirted for a while, he started to play with my hair, but I decided I was not interested and went back to my friends. 2 days later, I turned on the news and learned he was arrested for the murder of another girl on the same evening I met him. Story 40. Sepsis during an operation. I woke up with a blood pressure of 40/30. Luckily, there are no permanent consequences. Story 41. Sepsis occurred after a severe kidney infection and a 12-millimeter kidney stone that would not pass. I was hospitalized for 6 days and was reportedly a few days from death. Story 42. After suffering from bouts of extreme bloating for about 10 years, it became so severe one night that I called an ambulance. The emergency room performed imaging, diagnosed constipation, which I knew was incorrect, and sent me home. A neighbor came to get me and brought me back. No sooner had she left than the emergency room called back. A different doctor reviewed the images and wanted me to return immediately for emergency cecal volvulus surgery. My intestines were twisted at the junction between the small intestine and the colon. They had to remove the twisted section along with a few inches on either side and sew everything back together. If the second doctor had not identified this, my intestines could have ruptured, which might have been life-threatening. Story 43. This will probably get lost in the comments. But years ago, sometime in the mid-1980s, my dad had one of those big conversion vans. You know the kind, captain's chairs, middle seats that swivel, and a bench seat in the back that could be turned into a bed. You could practically live there. Anyway, we were driving down a country road, and being the irritating little kid that I was, I would frequently switch from the middle seats to the back seat bed just playing around. Well, at one point I got tired of the middle seats and went to the back. No more than 5 seconds later, The window right by where I was sitting exploded. Turns out that there was a bullet that hit our window. My dad stopped at the nearest police station. It didn't take them long to figure out what happened and who did it. A teenager had been hunting in the woods nearby, and he had already been warned about hunting in that area so close to the road. I don't really know what else came of it since I was so young. There is no telling what would have happened if I had still been sitting there. I may not be here today. Story 44. Last winter, I spun my box truck on a curvy slope and landed on a snowbank after delivering goods to a customer. After being stuck for 1.5 hours, the property maintenance worker finally came with a Hilux and threw enough dirt under my wheels to get me free. Before that, he went to check the back of my truck and said, "You are one lucky person." When I went to check it out, I went pale because if those snowbanks had not been there, my truck would have gone through a small fence. After about 10 meters, there is a steep slope and a 20-meter drop straight down to a local ice hall's parking lot where people were present. Two things made this even worse. It happened 2 days before Christmas, and the place I delivered the goods was a hospital. Even when I drove there in the spring and summer, and now in the fall, I get chills every time and would most likely do anything to avoid delivering there in winter. The only comfort I had was my boss getting mad at the company whose goods we were delivering, as he had fought them the whole year because every place in that city where we deliver is built on a hill. Literally houses, schools, everything. Story 45. There was that motorcycle accident. The bear in my house. The suicide attempts. A potentially fatal cardiac defect. Almost drowning in a Class 5 rapid with no life jacket. Pick one and I will tell you about it. Story 46. Getting run over by a jeepney when I was 4, going to the deep end of the pool when I did not know how to swim, and triggering my unknown at the time heart condition to 200 beats per minute and trying to sleep it off. Story 47. Slid across the Trans-Canada Highway in Saskatchewan into oncoming traffic on the first sub-zero night. There were oncoming 18-wheelers passing every 10 or 20 seconds before we slid. As we slid through the ditch, we all knew this was it, and I pictured the police at my sister's door. The next day, we came to a stop in the oncoming lane. Nothing. We booted it back through the ditch onto the right side and looked back. The 18-wheelers were passing by again. A minute sooner or a minute later, and they would have been scraping us off the grill of one of those 18-wheelers. Story 48. At my friend's cottage, we were both around 16 at the time. We were walking to the tiny beach when a lightning bolt suddenly struck a tree that was at most 20 feet in front of us. There were splinters as big as swords in the walls of cabins hundreds of feet behind us. Neither of us had a scratch. Story 49. Choked on a giant lollipop. When I was a kid, those big head lollipops were popular. I was 10 years old at school around dismissal time. I had one lollipop in my mouth and was playing with 2 other friends with a beach ball. Suddenly, the stick came out, and I kept the rest in my mouth without thinking much of it. I tried to swallow my saliva and accidentally swallowed the lollipop instead. Felt terrible. The school was small and held in a 2-story house, so moving around was quick. I started running upstairs, knocking on doors, but no one understood what I was trying to say. I was just pointing at my throat and banging on the walls. Panic hit hard. I rushed downstairs and started banging on the cafeteria table. A lady looked at me, concerned and confused, but didn't check on me. I ran outside toward the exit. I got into a crowd of people. I was already pale and purple. I heard someone say, "Flip her upside down." I thought, hello? I'm already out of air and purple. If you flip me upside down, I might pass out or die. I could hear very little. Someone tried calling an ambulance, but in Brazil, it takes almost 30 minutes for one to arrive. So there went my hope. At this point, I couldn't hear or process anything anymore. 5 minutes went by, or at least it felt like it. Suddenly, a lady came from behind me, squeezed my belly, and yelled for someone to slap my throat with a handshaking gesture. She got it out on the second try. The lollipop came flying out almost half an inch smaller. I felt an incredible relief and was catching my breath for at least 2 minutes. I had a sore throat for 2 weeks and ended up in the emergency room. Never again. Watch out if you have children. Choking is no joke and can kill quickly. The friend who tossed me the ball felt really guilty, and I had to comfort her for a while because it truly wasn't her fault. I was just a careless kid. If it wasn't for that one lady, I wouldn't be here today. Story 50. I was playing a game my siblings and cousins called Ocean. It was simply about who could swim the furthest out into the ocean and stay there for 10 seconds. We always played in the Gulf of Mexico and were used to the relatively shallow sandbars. This time, however, we were in Myrtle Beach playing in the Atlantic Ocean. I went out as far as I could because I thought I saw a sandbar to stand on, but it was not really there. I got pulled out much further than I wanted and could not swim back or sideways because I was already exhausted. Somehow, a lifeguard saw me far out and rescued me on a jet ski. I was ghost pale for about an hour afterward from fear and anxiety. Story 51. As a toddler, I contracted meningitis, encephalitis, and mononucleosis at the same time. I was in a coma for 2 weeks. Doctors told my parents to prepare for a funeral, and then somehow I woke up. I am 25 now. Story 52. Poor life choices. I ate moldy beef jerky and spent 3 days dry heaving. I ended up in the hospital as well. Story 53. A half-ton truck landed on me, crushing the right upper side of my body. I suffered a concussion and amnesia. It was a difficult experience. Do not get into the back of an old truck and drive down a dirt road. It will not end well. There were 6 of us total in the accident, and the only ones injured were myself and my twin. Her neck was broken, and one of her wrists was cut. Story 54. A shark big enough to kill me was coming straight at me in a wave. I was thinking, so this is how I die. By the way, it was definitely not a dolphin. I see them often. Story 55. A car accident occurred when I was 20. I was not wearing a seatbelt and was thrown headfirst out of the rear window as the car flipped end over end 4 times down a hill. I broke my neck in 6 places, partially scalped myself, and had 350 stitches from head to toe, mostly on my head. It took the surgeons 6.5 hours to put me back together again. I wore neck braces for 4 months. I refused to allow them to fuse my vertebrae together, a choice I now regret. Story 56. Stroke at 69 last February. Very fortunate to get to a hospital within the treatment window. Had been shouting for help at midnight on the side of a freezing cold road for 30 minutes before I was heard. I knew it was a stroke and I was sure it was the end. Story 57. I suppose it depends if flatlining for 1 minute and 7 seconds qualifies as close to death or temporarily deceased. Story 58. When I was 14, I went swimming with my brother and sister-in-law at a beach. I didn't know how to swim but got into the water, planning only to go where I could touch the ground. The water was up to my chest, so I stopped. I wanted to go a little further, up to my shoulders. But when I took the next step, there were potholes. Every step I took, I was standing on my tippy toes, gasping for air until I literally couldn't touch the ground and was fighting for myself while the waves pulled me in even more. No one in the group could swim and save me. I had flashbacks from the day I was born and relived everything again. My whole life flashed before me and I thought it was the end. But I kept fighting. I know this sounds strange, but I literally thought, no way I am going to die a virgin. And God listened to me that day. There were 2 surfers at the beach who had just gotten out of the water and were about to go home. My brother stopped them and asked for help to save me. A woman came on her surfboard and rescued me. I literally saw death. My whole life flashed before me, but maybe God had other plans. I am forever grateful to that woman, whom I never saw again. She came in the form of God and saved me. Proud to say I have learned to swim now, though I am still not an expert. Grateful. Story 59. When I was little, I was sitting in a deck chair on the beach. My sister called me over and I went to her. Less than 10 seconds later, a rock from the cliff behind us, probably the size of an American football or rugby ball, fell onto the chair and broke it. I do not remember this, but my mother does. Story 60. This is one of my favorite stories to tell. When I was about 10, I was taking swim lessons at a beach. It was a sort of free time where the instructor brought out toys and equipment for us to use in the water. There was also a surfboard floating just below the surface. My immediate underdeveloped thought was, I'm going to limbo under that. So I went underwater with my eyes shut and got stuck. I couldn't understand why I couldn't just move the board to get some air. A few seconds passed before my brain went into panic mode and told me to open my eyes. The board was chained to the bottom, not just floating freely. At this point, I was digging my nails into the foam bottom of the board and clawing my way out from under it, which was exceptionally hard when you realize you're very close to needing to inhale. I broke the surface of the water after who knows how long, and I vividly remember my vision going completely dark for a few seconds. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my instructor. Story 61. I flatlined and had chest compressions that broke my ribs. I've been exposed to explosions that took me off my feet. I've fought fires that got very dangerous. I've developed tinnitus from noises that were so loud you literally couldn't think, write, or speak. I've been exposed to chemicals in my lungs that have taken years off my life. I'm just waiting for that to catch up to me. Story 62. In Operation Enduring Freedom, I had a sniper round hit a wall about 4 inches from my head, kicked some debris into my face, causing slight bleeding. I was disoriented for 1 to 2 minutes, thinking I was shot in the face. Story 63. Coma. Glasgow Coma Scale Score 3, the lowest score possible. A low score is bad. The explantation team stopped a few minutes before the operation. The anesthesiologist detected a faint pulse and some brain activity. The patient came out of coma some time later. So now I am still here instead of being a corpse. Story 64. Summer of '93. I was 17 years old. I had a road bicycle with 23mm tires pumped to 105 pounds per square inch. I was riding solo around the Black Hills. I started at Custer State Park, rode through the Needles, then Mount Rushmore, up Iron Mountain, and down the hill back to Custer State Park. I realized I was going a bit fast when I passed cars and recreational vehicles down the hill from Rushmore toward Keystone. My computer said my maximum speed was 63 miles per hour. Nothing happened, but I spent the rest of the ride with my head on fire about what could have happened. I was wearing spandex with a spandex-covered piece of styrofoam strapped on my head. Nowadays, I pedal along gravel roads. Only a few in my area will power up the gravity motor enough to scare me. Story 65. Ran out of air 30 meters underwater on a wreck with strong currents while scuba diving. Had to exit through big swells after buddy breathing on a safety stop. I couldn't stop thinking, if I come off this ladder, I weigh a ton and have no air to make myself buoyant. I couldn't drop my weight belt because of divers below. Story 66. I was in a cord accident and born in a critical condition. I had no oxygen for 4 minutes. I suffered a hypoxic brain injury, but I am happy to be here. Story 67. Streptococcus pneumoniae infection affected all my joints. I underwent emergency surgery to drain fluid and infection. I was also losing blood, and doctors could not determine the cause. It was discovered that I had 3 bleeding ulcers simultaneously. I spent 5 weeks in the hospital, followed by 10 days in a care facility to gain weight and regain the use of my hands and feet after being operated on approximately 12 different times. The doctor said if my friends had not brought me to the emergency room, I would have died. Story 68. Took a risky dose of 25 INBOMe. Heart rate was 230 beats per minute for 2 hours. If we had not called the hospital when we did, the doctor said we had 10 minutes until cardiac arrest. Good times. Story 69. I jumped off a construction barge in the Mississippi River and was almost wedged between its underside and the river bottom. Story 70. Childbirth. The baby got stuck, and it was too late for a cesarean section. I lost nearly 2 liters of blood due to a hemorrhage. Then I had a reaction to the blood transfusions, resulting in a dangerously high fever, which meant they had to stop and start the transfusions multiple times. It took 24 hours to get enough blood into me. It is surprising that even in 2024, in the developed Western world, childbirth is still unpredictable, dangerous, and can be deadly. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder afterwards. I was always pro-choice, but having a baby has made me even more so. Story 71. My family and I survived the 2004 tsunami that hit South Asia. We were vacationing and had taken a boat to a museum situated on a rock about 1 to 2 kilometers into the ocean, away from the shore, the morning the tsunami hit. We were stranded on that rock with no food or drinkable water, no means of communication with our family or anyone else, and no assurance of rescue. All boats were washed away, and there was no place for a rescue helicopter to land or drop a rope ladder. We were on the rock for about 10 hours, watching buildings, vehicles, and people from the shore get washed away. We were finally rescued by fishermen on their catamarans when the tides calmed down. They were the only ones brave enough to come for us. Thank you, brave men. Story 72. When I was 9, I lost control of my bicycle, went at full speed across the street, and crashed into a fence. Story 73. 70 miles per hour head-on collision, electrocuted in a bathtub, nicked nerve and sinus surgery, hit a tree head-on at 40 miles per hour to avoid going straight into the Indian Ocean. Story 74. I was snorkeling with a friend at La Jolla Cove. We were swimming toward the caves when I was suddenly overcome with exhaustion. I am a decently strong swimmer, but I overestimated myself. I was about 200 feet from shore and nowhere near the beach, struggling to keep myself above water. I did not have the strength to call out to my friend, who was far ahead of me. I struggled toward the rocky shore. I was very close but about to go under. I made one final push and sat for a while, clinging to an underwater bush or tree. I had no strength, nothing left, but I was able to catch my breath enough to make it to shore. To drown in the ocean surrounded by people would have been a horrible way to go. Story 75. One time I had a seizure in a bathtub. Keep in mind, I also have cystic fibrosis, and the seizure lasted more than 5 minutes. I think I ended up in the pediatric intensive care unit on a ventilator in a medical coma. It was really scary. Then I spent a few nights on the cystic fibrosis floor, and it was very frightening. Story 76. Grade 2. I think I was 7 or 8 years old. I had pneumonia, and from what I was told, if my parents had not brought me to the hospital that day, I would have died during the night. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. So yeah, that is mine. Story 77. Suicide attempt by overdose on pills in junior year of high school. I was found in a public bathroom, and an ambulance was called. I was taken to the emergency room and spent a few days in the hospital. I know my choice of location was strange, but I was not in my right mind at the time. I spent time in a psychiatric ward after my attempt. Story 78. I had a very large blood clot in my lungs, close to my heart. While lying in the emergency unit, my resting heart rate was 124. I did not think I was going to see the outside of that hospital again. Story 79. When I was 6, I fell off an inner tube in a busy pool and ended up on the bottom. I did not know how to swim yet and did not know where to go anyway because all I could see above me were feet. My head was starting to hurt from holding my breath when I saw the bottom of one of the ladders. Thankfully, I managed this weird, sort of instinctive dog paddle over to it before it was too late. I remember clinging to that ladder with my arms and legs while I coughed up all kinds of water. Story 80. I had a tear in my colon. They discovered it in time at the hospital. Story 81. I am 15 years old. The closest I have come to death was when crossing the road without looking. A car traveling at 50 kilometers per hour almost hit me. Luckily, the driver braked just in time. Story 82. Well, for me, twice as a young boy, I collided with 2 moving cars on different occasions while riding a bicycle. In one incident, I crashed into the side of a van. In the other, I slid for about 100 feet, went under the front of a car, and my head bounced off the front bumper onto the pavement. I lost consciousness for a few seconds. Story 83. My mother and I were violently attacked by my older brother unexpectedly. During the attack, I had a surreal internal realization that we might not survive. It is difficult to describe the level of existential dread I felt in that moment. It was truly agonizing. Fortunately, he left the room, and I immediately grabbed my mother, saying, "We have to leave now," while calling emergency services with my other hand. Story 84. A drunk driver ran through a red light in front of me at an intersection. I was driving at the speed limit. Imagine if I had driven slightly faster. Story 85. Does anyone have that Far Side comic where Morty has a brush with death on the side and says, "Hey buddy, Watch the elbows? Story 86. Before I underwent an invasive medical procedure, the surgeon in charge made a poor decision about antibiotic coverage. Within an hour, I developed enterococcal sepsis. It was touch and go for a few days. Story 87. I worked across the border from Savannah in South Carolina. A friend I used to work with worked in Savannah but lived in South Carolina. We both worked the second shift and made arrangements to meet at the boat ramp in the Savannah Wildlife Refuge to catch up a bit. The Savannah Wildlife Refuge was having marsh fires going on for about a week, so while waiting for him to arrive, I thought I would see if I could catch the glow of the marsh fires. I got out of the van and walked to the side of the highway but saw nothing. I went to the middle of the highway but still saw nothing. It was the early hours with no traffic. As I stepped onto the grass shoulder on the opposite side, an alligator hissed at me. I assumed it was a mother and that I was getting too close. I never saw her, but I certainly got the message of her distinct warning. I do not recall ever feeling so overwhelmed with fear. I made a beeline to the van, got in, and never stepped outside of it during our whole visit. Story 88. Two drivers racing hit my car, causing me to flip and slide. I walked away with a small scratch on my hand from the broken glass. Story 89. An arc flash occurred at work. My coworker and I managed to stand a few meters away, thankfully. Story 91. Born with the umbilical cord around my neck. The nurse told my mom they had lost me, but I was misplaced, I guess. 2. Blood poisoning from falling while rollerblading and not cleaning a small cut. 3. Appendix ruptured. Story 91. A drunk wrong-way driver zipped past me on the highway at night as I came over a hill. He was in the fast lane, and I was in the middle lane and had just turned on my blinker to get in the exit lane. I think he thought he was in the slow lane on the other side. There was no time to react. He just zipped by, and we were past each other. I made my exit and called emergency services. He killed half of the family that was in the fast lane about 10 car lengths behind me. Story 92. Trigger warning. Depression and suicide. As a teenager, I was depressed for years and eventually became suicidal. I am okay now and very happy to be alive, but at the time, this was not the case. I would cross the road with my eyes closed, hoping it would send me straight into the afterlife. I took a bath with a toaster, but instead of killing me, it just turned the lights off. After trying to turn them back on, it was clear the fuse box had saved my life. I do not know if I got lucky or if I was not in that much danger to begin with because the fuse box did exactly what it was designed to do. I definitely got lucky and almost certainly should have died when I took a large amount of paracetamol and went to bed thinking I would not wake up. Dying from liver failure is not a quick, painless death. It takes time, and after throwing up everything inside you, dry heaving starts to hurt. I was supposed to go on a school skiing trip and was planning to still go. For some reason, after waking up, I thought it had not worked and I would be fine. That was when I threw up the first time. My parents asked if I was okay, and I said, yes, I probably ate something bad last night. Now that it's out, I feel much better. I was lying, of course. I felt terrible. I vomited again and again. In the span of 10 minutes, I vomited 7 times, and my dad told me I could not go on the skiing trip because I was sick. I did not care about the skiing trip anymore because I realized I was dying. The reason I took all those pills the night before was a recent breakup that happened 2 days earlier. I had a breakdown and decided that I was not going to half-ass it this time. I went downstairs in the middle of the night and took 38 paracetamol and 2 ibuprofen tablets. I read somewhere that 40 to 50 paracetamol tablets would almost certainly kill you. I added the 2 ibuprofen because I thought I did not have any more paracetamol left and wanted to reach 40 pills. Later, I found out there was a packet with 50 paracetamol tablets in a cabinet somewhere. I had just missed it. If I had found the extra paracetamol or gone on that trip, I would most certainly be dead. Now that I was aware this was not the quick death I was hoping for and was actually quite painful and lasting, I started to doubt my impulsive decision from the night before. I considered waiting it out, but as time went on, I had time to think and realized that I might have overreacted. I went to my mom and said that I thought it could be my liver. My mom dismissed this and said I just had a stomach bug or something. I kept bringing it up to the point where my mom asked me why I thought it would be. My liver. I didn't answer. She looked at me and asked if I had taken or done something to myself. My parents knew I was depressed and had suicidal thoughts. I just never told them I was actually suicidal. I told her I had taken paracetamol, and she hugged me. I do not remember if she was crying or not. At this point, my brain was not processing emotions anymore. Having to tell my mother that I had tried to kill myself broke me. I felt numb. We hugged for a little while and then called the doctor. I went to the emergency room, where I was given medicine through and for that would counteract the paracetamol and protect my liver. I was told I might have to stay the night. This was on a Friday, and I ended up leaving the hospital the following Sunday. A week later. Every day they took my blood and ran tests to see how my liver was doing. For a week straight, they told me my liver values were rising, which was bad. If it did not stop rising, my liver would fail, and I would be in serious trouble. After the first 3 days, the doctor said they were not sure if I should be kept on the medication, because it could also be harmful if taken too long. The doctors consulted another hospital that has a specialized unit for liver and kidneys. They said to keep me on the medication until my liver values started dropping. At the time, I did not think much of it, just doctors doing doctor things. Looking back, they really told me, "Sorry, you have seriously damaged yourself, and we do not know how to fix this, but we will ask for help." Luckily, someone knew how to save me, and my liver values dropped. Then my kidneys acted up for a couple of days, but after they calmed down, I could go home. I got a new psychiatrist, and with time and therapy, I got better. It was not easy, but after that traumatic week, I knew I never wanted to do something like that to myself again. Seeing friends and family visit because they did not know if I would be coming home was heartbreaking, especially knowing that I put my loved ones in that position. I was not able to grasp the severity of the situation at the time. My brain would not let me. I cannot explain it, but my brain just shut off that part. I guess it was easier to ignore the whole thing and dissociate than try to understand and accept what I had done. I am so thankful for all the people who came by, kept a brave face, and laughed with me even though they might have been screaming or crying inside. In the weeks after, I became more aware of how much it had affected people. It took me a while to get rid of the guilt, and I do not think I ever fully did. I tried apologizing to the girl who had broken up with me before I tried to kill myself. I was still in the hospital and unsure if I would ever leave. I felt it necessary to apologize to her and tell her it was not her fault. She said she knew it was not, but it felt like it was her fault and apologizing would not fix anything. We did not talk much after that, but I have always felt bad for putting her in that position. I completely understand why she did not appreciate my apology, and doing it more would not have made anything better. This all happened over 6 years ago. Yes, I almost died, but I have learned a lot since then. Now I know that if it ever gets that bad again, I can get help and get through it without doing anything drastic. Story 93. I am 61 now, but when I was 28, I had what I thought was a particularly long monthly cycle. It would almost stop, then start again very heavily. After about 20 days of this, I went to the doctor. He said he thought it was an infection of some kind and performed a cauterization in his office, which was so painful I nearly passed out. I later learned what he did was negligent. Later that day, I was in so much pain I called his office, and they told me to go to the emergency room. I did, but since I had no insurance, they would not see me. They recommended I go to the nearest hospital that would treat me without insurance, over 100 miles away. My husband was a truck driver on the road, and my family was having a big gathering and would not take me, so I had to drive myself. When I got there, I could barely walk. The staff at that hospital were very caring. They took me in, did an exam, and found I was bleeding internally as well as externally due to being pregnant in the fallopian tubes. They estimated 4 months, which explained the severe damage. After the surgery, my doctor told me I would not have survived another 12 hours. He also said that if I ever wanted a child, I had a window of about a year. Exactly a year later, I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. It was a difficult pregnancy, and I spent a lot of time in the hospital, but she is now 33 years old and has made me a grandmother with the gift of a precious grandson. It was all worth it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.